Well, we've all seen this movie before. Jean-Luc Brunel, close associate of Jeffrey Epstein, one of those names that you always would hear, along with Ghislaine Maxwell and a couple others, when you dug even an inch deep into the Epstein story. He's been found dead now in his jail cell in Paris. What a shocker, I have to say. You know, we lost him too soon. But, with all the crimes that he's likely to have committed, I bet that was weighing very heavily on his conscience. He'd been in jail since 2020. So I guess we shouldn't be shocked that he was able to shoot himself 3 times in the back of the head. No, I kid. He didn't really shoot himself 3 times in the back of the head. He just hung himself with toilet paper somehow by, I guess, holding his legs up. And, I mean, who knows? I'm not an expert in suicide, but this was definitely a suicide, okay? And don't let anybody tell you different. Jean-Luc Brunel had a lot of remorse. He had a lot on his conscience, and he offed himself. It's as simple as that. He was afraid to go to trial. He was afraid to face his victims. Had nothing to do with him being able to implicate all sorts of powerful people in this terrible scandal and in the horrible, web of crimes that was weaved by Epstein, Brunel, Maxwell, Prince Andrew, and so many others. It's not that Brunel would curate and pimp out young girls to men other than Epstein, as well as Epstein himself, who then Epstein would pimp out to lots of powerful men. And so, yeah, it's definitely possible that Brunel could have implicated names that we know, men that we've heard of, maybe even women, in crimes against underage girls, or even girls who were of age but were still prisoners. They were still sex slaves. I think there's been too much focus on the age of consent thing, because I think some people, when they hear, he had sex with a minor, it makes them think, oh, okay, so he picked up a girl at a bar who had a fake ID. She wasn't really 18, she was 17, and, that can happen. That can be an honest mistake. What's not an honest mistake is kidnapping girls and imprisoning them in your sex dungeon. That's not an honest mistake. And, there are girls who were kidnapped, when they were 18 or up, and they were forced to engage in unspeakable acts with these creepy, gross old perverts. Brunel was 76 when he died, and he had been at this for a very, very long time. The accusations against him go back into, I think, the early 90s. It's probably not a stretch to think he was doing it in the 80s, too. And he'd use his position as, the head of a modeling agency to lure in girls who wanted to, make money with their body, but not in a sexual way. Maybe sexualized, if they're, depending on what they're modeling. But these were not women who were looking, in most cases, to prostitute themselves. And perhaps some of them went along with it willingly. Some of the, of-age ones, obviously underage, they can't consent. But at its core, this was not just a pedophile ring. This was a broader sexual slavery ring. Some of these girls were held in captivity long enough to where, they reached the age of majority while they were still being held. It didn't suddenly become consensual, okay? They were still being held against their will. And even if that weren't the case, there actually are cases of, at least in Brunel's case, and I'm sure in Epstein's case and many of these other men that they would have implicated, of them abusing girls who were, literally children. You could not mistake them. If you saw them, like, in a bar or something, you were picking up, trying to pick up girls at the bar, and you saw these 3 12-year-old sisters that Brunel is alleged to have abused, you wouldn't think they're adults. And nevertheless, rich and powerful men associated with Epstein and Brunel and Maxwell, and this was all known. It's, as you say, an open secret. And so you could bet that there's plenty of well-connected people who would not want Brunel to name names, just like there were plenty of well-connected people who didn't want Epstein to name names and who don't want Maxwell to name names. Obviously, Ghislaine Maxwell is now under a significant threat. It would be a miracle if she's able to live out her sentence. What she needs to do as insurance, I think, is go on TV, do a full interview, do long interviews with somebody who will publish everything. Don't do it with corporate media, because corporate media will edit out important names. And you need to tell your tale. Tell everything, and give them less of a reason to kill you. Because the reason why they wanted Brunel dead, why they wanted Epstein dead, and why they, obviously at this point, will want Maxwell dead, is so that they don't tell their tale, and so that they don't name names. Once you've named names, you've taken away, a lot of their reason for killing you. At that point, they would just kill you out of revenge, and it would be obvious. But right now, they just want to silence you. And they can't silence you once you've already spoken, if it's on camera, if it's recorded. The cat's out of the bag. And at that point, any of the names you name will become prime suspects in your death. It becomes much harder to assassinate you. Now, do I think that Maxwell would really come out and tell her tale? No, I don't. She does not, it's hard. Obviously, I don't know any of these people personally, but the feeling I get from Maxwell is that she is delusional and out of touch. I think that she honestly believed that nothing bad could really happen to her. I heard some interesting analysis to that effect, during the trial regarding her body language and whatnot, and the way that the defense was conducted. It seemed more that she was just pushing, that she was more defending her reputation rather than trying to defend herself in a legal sense. And typically that would not be a lawyer who's choosing to run a defense like that. It would be the client pushing the lawyer in that direction to just try and do reputation damage control and discredit the victims without really attacking the core of the legal argument. And so I don't think that Maxwell would come out and just give us the whole truth. I think that she's much too proud for that. And if it comes down to it, she'll take her story to her grave, which would be very unfortunate, because that really would be the end of the tale, now wouldn't it? Because wasn't it the pilot or Epstein's personal chef, or maybe both of them, were off before Epstein, and then Epstein was killed or died, whatever you want to say. I'm not sure if YouTube has specific rules about Epstein. Now we have Brunel. And then the final piece, the last big player, will be Maxwell. I'd hate to have or I wish I had a more positive spin on this, but at this point, we've seen this play out plenty of times with scandals, with major crimes bigger than this one, frankly, that when all of the involved parties are powerful people, they can keep it just to themselves, and they can keep it out of the news, they can keep it out of the public record, if that's what they want to do. And I think it was clear from the beginning that was always the intention. That's been the intention for since all the way back when Epstein first made the news. It had been the intention since Epstein as a character was probably invented. They likely always had contingency plans in case there was any sort of exposure, that the cover was blown. The only way that I think we're ever going to get any more details about this matter is, one of two ways. Someone who is involved, who was a low-level participant, maybe one of Epstein's staff members, who had signed the NDAs or whatever, if they're somehow able to make it through to the end of their life without getting picked off or anything, they could have some sort of deathbed confession thing. There's always that possibility. That's a way that a lot of secret conspiracies end up getting, I don't know if exposed is the right word, but fleshed out throughout history. And the other thing would be something akin to the fall of the Berlin Wall in the United States, in which you have citizens flood into, the CIA offices in Langley, or the FBI, or any number of these agencies that would have relevant documents on the Epstein case and everyone who is associated with, and go through them just like they went through the Stasi files in East Germany at the end of the Cold War. So that means that our two options for learning the truth are one, deathbed confession, which then would have to be trumpeted by somebody. I mean, just because somebody gives a deathbed confession doesn't mean that anybody in that room is going to go then publish it. So you have to add that level of uncertainty in, that probability. Or regime change in the United States. It's really that extreme. Because obviously, Epstein is too closely tied to the current regime for them to ever allow this story to be completely fleshed out. You know, when East Germany came apart and the Stasi files were published by the West German government, which absorbed East Germany, people learned of all sorts of crazy conspiracies about people and news stories in East Germany, and West Germany for that matter, that had occurred throughout the Cold War. People learned of all of these events that turned out to be Stasi plots. And I'd imagine if we had a similar situation here in the United States, we would have the same sorts of revelations, tenfold or more. Remember, the Stasi was only around for about 40 years. 40 years ago was 1982, just to give you a perspective on that. The CIA's been around for about 80 years at this point, and the FBI longer than that. I would imagine, actually no, I shouldn't even say I imagine, I know for a fact Epstein was not the first of his kind. He learned, maybe not directly from Roy Cohn, but I think Roy Cohn is the archetype. Donald Trump's old attorney, for those of you who are unaware, also worked for McCarthy on the House Un-American Activities Committee, a big mob guy. So, with that said, I sincerely hope that the truth will make its way into the public record someday, but that day, alas, is not today. So I will see you folks back here tomorrow.